How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to an episode here on Let's Build Twitter. As always, I'm Ethan, or an Encoder, your favorite underqualified senior software engineer. And as always, if you guys don't want access to that private repository, there's a link in the description down below that'll walk through exactly how to get that. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into what we're working on today. Today, we're going to be working on both the front end and back end to go ahead and get it so we can start processing these messages and conversations on the front end. We're going to do a little bit of work in the back end, just kind of configuring things and making things work. And then on the front end, we're going to go ahead and set up some new stuff inside of our slices to actually go ahead and process them, as well as in a couple of hooks and some other things. So that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the code and get to work here. Today, we're going to go ahead and start out inside the backend because we need to go ahead and create a couple of comparators so that we can go ahead and basically sort our messages and sort our conversations based off of when the last message came in. So I'm going to go ahead and go into our source main Java, go all the way down to our utils folder, and we're going to go ahead and create a message comparator.java. And we could have made this a class. Next time we'll do that, but we'll go ahead and say public class and then message comparator. And I see that my LSP failed. I'll go ahead and restart Vim after this. This is going to implement and then comparator, and this will be a message like so and go like that. So let me go ahead and save and quit out of this and get this restarted. I'll be right back. There we go. That's much better. So now we can go ahead and import our comparator. We can also go ahead and import our message. And now this is going to be mad because we do not have the implemented method. So let's go and implement that method. And this is going to be very, very simple. We're just going to go ahead and compare the two message dates. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to return and arg0.getSentAt and then .compare_to. And then literally we're just going to say arg1.getSentAt. So it's going to go ahead and compare those two dates. And let's see what the error is. To type blah, blah, blah. I don't know why this is complaining. Let's see here. Message comparator, rename message comparator. I might have named something incorrectly. Yes, I did. Let's go ahead and rename the file to that. And then quit and WA and just make sure it compiles. I think it's fine now. I just renamed or named it incorrectly. Let's just make sure this is named properly. Message comparator looks good. Let's go ahead and close out of this. We'll go ahead and make another class. So space JC. This is also going to go into our utils, and this is going to be conversation comparator. Let's go ahead and spell that properly this time. And this is going to be how we compare our conversations. So once again, we're going to go ahead and extends comparator, and this one is going to be conversation like so. Let's go ahead and import our conversation, and for some reason conversation is not showing up. Why is that? You know what? It's because it grabbed the wrong comparator. Of course it did. Let's try again. Comparator, we want to go ahead and import comparator from Java util. I'm not sure why it's not showing up unless I spelled it wrong again. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and try bringing the conversation first. It's being a little bit finicky. Okay, now can we please bring in the comparator? It might be implements comparator. Actually, let's go ahead and fix this. Let's go ahead and say implements comparator. And there we go. Go ahead and add in the unimplemented method. I can't type and I don't know what I'm doing right now, but here we go. So now this one's going to be a little bit more involved because we have a few more things to check, because technically our messages could be empty to start out. So we're going to go ahead and say if arg0.get conversation message, and I realize this should be messages, but I'm in way too deep to fix it now. Size is equal to 0, and arg1.get conversation message .get size is not equal to 0. Then we're going to go ahead and return 0. And I did this wrong. This should be both equal to 0. So if they're both equal to 0, we'll just go ahead and say they're the same. Let's go ahead and bring in this guy and copy it. Then we'll go ahead and paste it in. And we're going to go ahead and change it slightly. So go ahead and paste. So now if the conversation 1 or 0 is not equal to 0, and this one is equal to 0, we'll go ahead and return 1. We'll also do the opposite. So go ahead and say if this one is equal to 0 and then this one is not equal to 0, we'll go ahead and return -1. So that'll be a way to kind of sort them if they don't have the conversation. Now we're going to go integer last message, and 0 is equal to arg0.get conversation message .size, and then -1. We're going to do the same thing. Integer last message and 1 is equal to arg0.get conversation message .size -1. So we're going to go ahead and get that last message. We're going to say return arg0 dot get conversation message dot get, then last message in 0 dot get sent at, and we're going to go ahead and say dot compare to, and then finally we're going to say arg1 dot get conversation message dot get, and then last message in 1, and then we're going to go ahead and say dot, and we need to make sure we do this right, dot get sent at, and then we're going to compare them. So basically we're going to go ahead and get the last messages in each of these conversations and go ahead and compare them. So this way, whenever we go ahead and fetch all of our conversations, it's going to be the first one on top that is like the newest conversation that's had a message, and then it's going to basically actually be the opposite inside of our messages. And this is because of the way that Twitter works. So whenever you go through the Twitter, the bottom message is the most recent, and then as you go up to the top, it's older and older. So I want to go ahead and kind of order them that way. That way we can kind of keep track of them easier. So now we need to go ahead and update our conversation service to use these. So let's go into conversation service. Inside our conversation service, let's go ahead and come down to line, it says 32. So it looks like it's going to be inside of our read all conversations with users. So what we're going to go ahead and do is instead of returning this guy here, we're actually going to go ahead and say a list of conversations. If I could actually type properly, conversation. And then we're going to go ahead and call this all conversations is equal to find all. And then we're also going to go ahead and say conversion comparator. We're just going to call it CC. We're going to say CC is equal to new conversation comparator, like so. Now we're going to go ahead and say all conversations dot and then stream. And then we're going to go ahead and say dot map. And then we're going to go ahead and map each conversation like so. And then here we're going to go ahead and say list message, and we're going to say conversation messages is equal to conversation dot get conversation message. Then we want to go ahead and sort these. So we're going to go ahead and say collections dot sort, and we're going to go ahead and pass in the conversation messages in a new message comparator like so. So we're going to go ahead and sort those messages. We're going to go ahead and say conversation dot set conversation message, and inside here we're going to go ahead and pass in that conversation messages object that we just set up, and we're going to go ahead and return that conversation. So now we have reordered all of our conversations, or reordered all of our messages inside of this conversation. Let's go ahead and bring in this message and also bring in collections. But basically now we have went ahead and reordered all of the messages in each conversation. Now we're going to go ahead, and before we do this, we're going to go ahead and say dot sorted like so. If I could type dot sorted, we're going to go ahead and use that comparator and then dot to list. So now we are ordering the messages to be the first on top, so on and so forth. And then we're going to go ahead and sort the conversations based on when the last message was. So now we're going to go ahead and return all conversations like so, and that is good to go. So now we're all going to come down here before we return the conversation and do the same thing. So we're going to go ahead and say if. We need to do this, I think, before we actually hit the conversation is equal to null. So if conversation is not equal to null, then we're going to go ahead and replace this. So we're going to say list message once again, conversation messages is equal to conversation dot get message like so. And let's go ahead and get rid of this extra space here. And then we want to go ahead and say collections dot sort once again. And instead of this, we're going to say conversation messages, maybe. We're also going to go ahead and pass in a new message comparator. And then we can go ahead and say conversation dot set conversation message to our conversation messages that we just reordered, and then we will go ahead and return that. So once again, we want to go ahead and reorder these, that way they're in the correct place. And then we also want to go ahead and just set the conversation dot and then set, if I could spell conversation right, I'm struggling today, dot set conversation message to a new array list just in case it was a new one. That way, whenever we try to loop through these later on inside of our front end, it's not going to throw an error on us. That should go ahead and set up so whenever we fetch the messages and everything, they're in the right order and they display properly. So now let's go ahead and hop onto the front end and set up so we can actually receive messages, and we'll have to do a few tweaks here and there as well. But let's get to work here. So on the front end, we're going to start out here inside of our use WebSocket hook. And what we need to go ahead and do is whenever we go ahead and connect to the Stomp client, we need to set it up so that we can actually connect to two or subscribe to two different queues here. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and underneath the Stomp client.subscribe, let's go ahead and add another Stomp client.subscribe. So Stomp client.subscribe. And here, this is going to be to backticks /user / curly brace user !user name / messages. And then here it's going to be on message received. And here we want to go ahead and rename this to on notification received. So now what we'll do is here, instead of this being on message received, this one will now be on notification received. We'll also go ahead and set up a function called on message received. We'll go ahead and pass in a payload of type any, and then we'll do some logic in here. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and say const message is equal to json.parse our body, and then we're going to go ahead and for now we'll just console.log and then say new message and then pass the message. So we can just go ahead and see that this is working properly. So now this should actually be payload.body. If I could actually type, my goodness, like that, and save. So now let's just make sure everything is working. So our front end was initialized and completed. Let's just go ahead and restart it one more time just to make sure nothing happened on the back end. I'll be right back when this is done. Cool. Now in the front end, let's go ahead and open up the console and inspect. Go to the console and refresh. What we want to go ahead and see is we see that we are subscribed to notifications and we are subscribed to messages. So now I'm going to go ahead and open up Postman on the side and I'm going to send a message after I go ahead and create a conversation. Okay, I'm going to go and refresh. Otherwise things will get a little bit weird. Then let's go ahead and send a message in. I'm going to do it right now. And let's see what happened. Unable to send a message at this moment. I messed something up. Oh, it's because, one second. Okay, I'm going to try send again. There we have it. Now you can see we have a notification and we have a message. Now, something we're going to run into here, and we're going to make a change in a second, is inside a message where JSON ignoring the conversation. But whenever we try to go ahead and map all of our messages to the conversations and everything, we're going to want to make sure we have that conversation ID. That way we can map it properly. So we're going to have to make some changes on the back end to get that to work. We'll have to do some other things. So let's just go ahead and continue and we'll see where things go here. So before we get carried away dealing with all the changes on the back end again, let's go ahead and make it so that whenever we open this guy up, you can actually click on this and you can see when this person joined Twitter, because we actually went ahead and added in that create timestamp. So let's go ahead and hop into the front end and get that working. So we're going to go ahead and go into our global interfaces, and inside of our global interfaces, let's go down to our user, and below our organization, let's go ahead and add in our create time stamp, which is going to be a date, and this is going to break some things that we need to go ahead and fix. So now let's go into our user slice and fix this up. Inside of our user slice, if we scroll down, whenever we actually log in the user, we need to put in all of this information. So here underneath organization, let's go ahead and put in the create timestamp. So this is going to be create timestamp, which would be action.payload.logged-in.user, and then create time stamp like so, and that should fix that issue. So now let's go ahead and set up a quick utility function to print out the date and year, or the month and year that they went ahead and signed up, and get that in there. So let's now hop into our date utils, and inside of our date utils, I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down to where we have our stringified date, and I'm going to go ahead and say export const, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this string, maybe stringify, and we're going to go ahead and call this full month and year. This is going to equal to an arrow function. This will take in a date, and return a string like so. Return, and this is going to be pretty simple. Backticks $ curly brace, and we're going to say months, and this will be date dot and then get month and -1. And then this is going to have a space. This should actually be +1, not -1. And then we'll have a space here and then $ curly brace, date.get full year, and make sure we call that as a function, and that's all we're going to return. So that looks good. So now we can go into our conversation user info component, change that, and we can go ahead and display when the user joins. So let's hop into that component. So now inside of our conversation user info, let's scroll down to where we have the placeholder. So right here, join the placeholder. Let's go ahead and delete this placeholder part. We'll also go ahead and delete the comment out of here because we're going to go ahead and throw our function in there. So now we can just go ahead and call string of phi, full month and year, and we can go ahead and pass in. Now I don't really understand why this doesn't get passed to the date properly, but we're gonna go ahead and say new date user.create timestamp. For whatever reason, JavaScript cannot parse in Java days properly. I should probably look into a better way of doing this, but now we should go ahead and be able to see that joined. So let's go ahead and hop into the front end and take a look at that. And now you can see that this is showing that we have a message, which is perfectly fine. We'll work on kind of dealing with this stuff in a future episode. But now if we click on this, you can see that they joined October 2024, which is when I'm recording this. So that looks good. So now we need to go ahead and continue to load in the messages into our slice so we can go ahead and like display, hey, there's a message here, so on and so forth. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop back into our global interfaces and work on some stuff in message as well as conversation. Near the bottom of our global interfaces, now we're going to go ahead and work on the message interface as well as make some changes inside of our conversation interface. Here we want to go ahead and we want our message ID. Underneath our message ID, we're going to have a message type, which will go ahead and be a message, or it will be an action, which we have set up on Java. We'll have a conversation ID. We're going to go ahead and have seen at, which is a date, which probably won't even act as a date, but it is what it is. We have sent by, which is a user. We have our seen by, which will be a user array. We will have our message image. I don't know why I have this first. It is what it is. In our message text, which is also a string. So that's good to go. Now the issue is we also need to go ahead and update down here. So instead of messages, this should actually be conversation and then message, like our backend, and then go ahead and fix that. And I believe that's everything we need to fix in here. Let me just double check. Cool. It looks good. So now what we need to go ahead and do is update and make a DTO in Java to actually go ahead and match kind of like the way this message looks, because we need the conversation ID, like I said, that way we can actually map all this stuff. So let's hop back into our backend, set up this DTO and get it being passed back to the front end so we can get to work here. So once again in Java, let's go ahead and just create a class, and it's going to go into DTO. I'm going to go ahead and call this message DTO. And I probably could have done this in several different ways. I just kind of did it the easiest way. All I'm going to do is basically copy over the same exact things we have inside message. So a private integer message ID. We're going to have a private message type. We're going to have a private integer conversation ID, which is the important part. We have a private local date time, and this is be sent at. We'll have a private application user sent by. We'll have a private and then set of application user, and this is seen by. We'll have a private string image, and this should be message image actually. So let's go ahead and fix that. Message image, and then we'll have a private string message text. So that should be good. We're going to go ahead and set up some constructors. So go ahead and say space CA, go ahead and do a no arg constructor, go ahead and do a all arg constructor. So go ahead and add all of these guys in. It's probably getting complained that we haven't imported message type and everything. So let's go ahead and import this stuff before I get ahead of myself here. So go ahead and bring in local date time, go ahead and bring in our application user, go ahead and bring in a set. So there's that. Let's go ahead and do our getters and setters. Go ahead and do a toString. We'll just add everything inside of the toString as well. So that should be good to go, except I messed up and added a get ID. We can just go ahead and delete that part. That's my bad. So let's go ahead and delete this, and that should be good to go. So now we just need to go ahead and use this across a couple of places, primarily inside of our notification service, and then inside of that function that returns a message as well. So let's go ahead and hop into the notification service. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is come down here to where we are creating and sending message notifications right here. And then before we actually send the message to each user, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create a message DTO and then pass that instead. So we're going to go ahead and say message DTO. Let's go ahead and call this message DTO is equal to a new message DTO, and we're going to go ahead and open up a constructor here. And inside the constructor, we'll go ahead and just pass in message.get message ID. And we could have probably just passed the message and then passed in also the message or the conversation ID, and it probably would have been a better way to do this, but it is what it is. Message.get message type, you live and you learn. Message.get and then conversation.get conversation ID. We'll pass in message.get sent at, message.get and then sent by, message.get, and this one will be seen by, message.get, and this will be message text, except we kind of flopped these, so this is still probably message image here. And then finally we'll say message.get message text. And let me just go ahead and double check the constructor here to make sure these are in the correct order. Yep, image comes before text. I just want to make sure I pass in those properly. Let's hop back in a notification service. So now instead of passing in the message whenever we create the notification, let's go and pass in DTO instead. Now same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this just to save a little bit of time for us. So let's go ahead and copy this. Let's hop into the message controller. Inside the message controller, we're going to go ahead and change this post mapping to send a message. It's going to go ahead and send a message DTO now. And then we're going to go ahead and say message is equal to message service. And then we can go ahead and just return that DTO that we created before. So we go ahead and say return, paste that in, and then we can go ahead and get rid of the message DTO part and just go ahead and return a new message DTO. So that's good to go. It's going to go ahead and pass in this message DTO, which includes a conversation ID, which is very important for us later on. But now we can actually go back into the front end, set up our slice and everything, and get everything working. I'm not sure if this is going to end up being 1 episode or 2 episodes, so kind of bear with me here. It might just be a really long 1 episode just to kind of get everything wrapped up. But let's hop back into the front end, go into the message slice, and get to work here. So inside the message slice, we need to actually be able to receive a message and kind of work with it. So let's come down here to the bottom where our reducers are, and below our update GIF URL, let's go ahead and set up our received message. And then in here, this is going to take in a state, and this is going to take in an action, which is going to be a payload action, and this will be a message. So this should be somewhat simple. We just need to do a little bit of work to kind of replace messages here and there and add messages to the right conversations. So to start, we're going to go ahead and say let conversations be a conversation array equal to json.parse and then json.stringify, which I don't know if this is 100% needed, but I want to play it safe here with the state.conversations. So go ahead and basically make a new array out of the conversations in our state. Then we're going to go ahead and say let conversation equal to conversations.find. We're going to go ahead and search for a specific conversation. We're going to say c.conversation ID is equal to our action.payload.conversation ID. So we want to make sure that we can find it based on that. I thought it was being a little bit weird. Let's go ahead and import message. I'm thinking that's why it's being a little bit strange, but there we go. So we're going to go ahead and try to find a specific conversation based on the message. If we don't have a conversation, we can't really do anything. So we're going to go ahead and just return the state. Otherwise, we're going to say let conversation, let conversation, if I could type, IDX equal to conversation dot index, and this will be conversations dot index of. We'll go ahead and pass in that conversation. So we're going to go ahead and find the conversation of that. That way we can kind of replace it in the array. We're going to say let messages equal to, and we're going to go ahead and say dot conversation dot conversation message, and then we're going to go ahead and say action.payload. So here we're going to go ahead and put it at the end of the array, like I said, because of the way that it's going to scroll. We're going to say conversation is equal to, and then conversation. And we're going to go ahead and say conversation message is equal to messages. Then we go ahead and update the conversation, and I messed up a bunch of stuff. So let's go ahead and fix conversation there. That's fine. Go ahead and fix conversation there. That's fine. Our conversation's set up. And then now we're going to go ahead and say conversations with an S dot splice. And we're going to go ahead and splice the conversation IDX and 1. So we're going to go ahead and replace conversation and 1. And we're going to go ahead and say conversations dot or equal to, and then conversation, comma, dot, conversations. We want the newest conversation on the top of the list. So that's why we're doing it that way. Finally, we're going to go ahead and update the state. So state is equal to dot state. And here we're going to have our conversations. We're going to go and replace that. We're going to go ahead and check to see if we even need to update the conversation. So if we have a conversation open and the conversation .conversation_ID is equal to the action.payload.conversation_ID once again. If that's the case, we're going to go ahead and set conversation. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and set it back to state.conversation, which is undefined, I guess, or not undefined, but we don't need to update the messages inside of it. So there we go. Now we just need to go ahead and return the state like so, and see if it's mad at us. It seems okay. So now that's good to go. So basically the logic here, we're going to go ahead and find the specific conversation we want to add the message to. We'll add the message and we'll go ahead and reorder the conversations. And then we'll go ahead and also update the conversation that's open if we need to. Now let's go ahead and import this or export this at the bottom. So let's go down to the bottom here. We're going to go ahead and say message received or receive message. I think it was supposed to be message received, but it is what it is. So whenever we receive a message, we'll dispatch that. And then we also need to go ahead and update the notification slice to be able to handle notifications that come in and send the unread notifications over here. Because currently we're only getting the unread notifications whenever we load up the application. We want to do it dynamically. So let's hop into the notification slice. Inside the notification slice, we're basically just going to make a very simple async thunk. It doesn't really do much. It's just going to export and then we're just going to go ahead and call this dispatch and unread notifications equal to create async thunk. Inside of here, we're literally not even going to add a fulfillment or anything in here. So this will be notification, slash, and then this is going to be called unread message, comma. We're going to go ahead and do our async, and then the payload will be a notification. And we'll have our thunk API. And inside of here, we're going to say const state any is equal to our thunk API.getState. We're going to go ahead and get the state of our slices here. Const, we're going to say existing unread messages is equal to state ?.message ?.unread and messages. So we're going to go ahead and get the unread messages currently inside of our message state. We're going to say const all messages is equal to ... existing unread, comma, and then we're going to go ahead and put in the payload because these are stored notifications. So we're going to go ahead and say thunk API.dispatch, and we're going to go ahead and dispatch our update and unread messages, which is inside of our message slice. We're going to go ahead and pass in all those messages. So anytime that we receive a notification for a new message to come in, we're going to go ahead and dispatch this. We'll send those messages to our message slice. So now what we need to go ahead and do is update our use WebSocket to do all this stuff. And then we can go ahead and start doing some of our final changes to make things look pretty. So let's hop into our use WebSocket once again. Instead of a use WebSocket, so now we're going to go ahead and go on our notification received. We're going to go ahead and check if our notification bucket type, notification type is equal to message specifically. If that's the case, we're going to go ahead and dispatch, and we're going to go ahead and dispatch unread notification. Actually, it's dispatch unread message, and I might have named that wrong. So let me go ahead and check that, and then notification. Let's go back into the notification slice. I might have messed up here. So this should be unread message. That's my bad. Let's go ahead and fix this. Unread message and save. Let's go back into the use webhook. So now we can go ahead and import this. There we go. So now there's that. And then finally, we're going to go ahead, instead of returning or console logging this, we're going to set it up to go ahead and dispatch. So we're going to go ahead and say const, and we're going to check if the conversation exists inside of our state first. So equal to conversations, which we need to actually bring in conversations first. I just realized that I forgot to do that. So we're going to come to the top here, and underneath our token, we're going to go ahead and set up a new state. So const conversations is equal to use selector. Go ahead and have our state and root state like so. This will be state.message.conversations. We're going to have our list of conversations, and we're going to check to see if our state basically has it, because what could happen is you could just be sitting there chilling and someone creates a message conversation with you, so it doesn't exist in your state yet. So we need to go ahead and fetch that first. So we're going to go ahead and say message conversation is equal to conversations.sum. We're going to go ahead and say conversation arrow function conversation dot conversation ID is equal to message.conversation ID. Message dot, and message doesn't know it exists, so that's fine. Conversation ID, it'll exist. So we're gonna go ahead and see if that message or that conversation exists in our state. If it doesn't, so if not, conversation exists. Exist. If that's the case, we're gonna go ahead and dispatch, and we also need to check for user and something else. So let me go ahead and fix this really quick. So if conversation doesn't exist and user is logged in and we have a token, which should all be the case, we're gonna go ahead and dispatch load conversations. We're gonna go ahead and pass in our user ID is user.user ID, and then we'll pass in our token. So if the conversation doesn't exist yet and someone like made the conversation and sent you a message, we'll go ahead and just fetch that conversation. Otherwise, if you have like logged in, you have fetched the conversation already, let's go ahead and dispatch and then received message, and we'll go ahead and pass in that message. So then fingers crossed, it'll go ahead and process it and add it to our list and everything. So now we're on the home stretch here. I know this is getting a little bit long, so let's go ahead and just update some things to make it apparent that we've actually gotten messages. So first, let's go into the message bar where I forgot to add the message like icon or circle icon whenever you get an unread message for individual chats. So let's hop in there. So here, let's go down to about line 62. We want it outside of this div, so we want it right here. We're gonna go ahead and say message state, and actually I'm not gonna write it out. I'm just gonna actually go ahead and copy it from here. It'll make our lives a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and copy this guy. We're gonna go ahead and just paste it here. Go ahead and format that and make it look pretty. And now we also want to go ahead and update the background color because it's a little bit funky. So let's go into our CSS and update the background color. And the background color for read messages, we're just gonna go ahead and make it a little bit see-through so it's not so jarring. We're gonna go ahead and say RGBA, and this is gonna be 29, 161, 242, 0.9. So it's just a little bit less jarring. We could try like 8.5 as well, but I think 8 was a little bit too light, so it is what it is. And now we need to go ahead and just set it up so that the conversation card can go ahead and display the text. So what I mean by that, let's hop into the front end really quick. Whenever we click on this guy, and let's actually refresh, I might not have any conversations right now. Let's go ahead and make a conversation. Let's refresh again. So whenever we click on this, instead of it saying to do, we actually want to go ahead and have it say the message that's last. So let's go ahead and do that. To that, let's go into the conversation card, and let's go ahead and go down to about line 64. So now instead of it saying like to do after completing messages, we're going to go ahead and add a curly braces, and let's go ahead and fix that up because it looks bad. We'll say conversation dot, and then conversation message dot length is greater than 0. So if we don't have any conversation messages, we obviously can't grab the first one or the last one. So we're going to go ahead and have some like default text there. So this will be conversation.conversation message. We're going to go ahead and say conversation.conversation message dot length -1. So we'll get the very last one dot message text. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and say conversation created or something, just in case like a conversation gets created but no message comes through. So go ahead and save that. We go back to our front end, we should see conversation created. So you can see conversation created. Now see if I can go ahead and get this to update to test, or if we're going to do a bunch of debugging. So let me go ahead and try to create a message from Rick. You can see it changed. We have a message now. You can see that it's from Rick. If we click on this, you can still see that we have a message. Obviously, we want to go ahead and display this next. And then in a future episode, we'll go ahead and make it so that each one of these individual components for messages, whenever they get read, they'll update the type icon with the unread messages and everything. But let's go ahead and just get some text in here to show that we have messages, and we can go ahead and wrap it up. So finally, to go ahead and display these messages, let's go into our conversation container. And inside of our conversation container, just underneath our conversation user info, we'll probably want to go ahead and put like a new component here or something, but we'll get there eventually. Go ahead and say conversation.conversationMessage.map. We'll go ahead and map through each message. And then for now, we'll go ahead and just return a P. And then inside we'll say message.message text. Like so. Go ahead and save that. And I messed something up. Message text. Like so. Let's go ahead and try it out once more. So now you can go ahead and see that we have our test. And as we get new messages, so like for example, let's go ahead and make a test 2, and I'll go ahead and just send it by Rick again. That way I don't have to mess around with stuff. So go ahead and send a test 2. I know you guys can't see this, but off screen, I'm sending test 2. I'm not sure why this didn't update. We did receive this, so I might need to look into this, or we might just need to refresh this component over and over again. But now you can see test 2. So we might need to look into getting this to refresh whenever we get new information inside of our message, but that's probably just a use effect, and that'll be fine. For now, we are processing messages. They are coming in. This is just like a state issue that we'll work on next episode. So this has been a little bit of a longer one, but I wanted to get all of this stuff done to kind of get a nice bow wrap to end it off basically with doing all this stuff with the front end and back end. Next episode, we'll go ahead and focus on the front end to get it so that these are in the right order, which they are, but they look nicer and all that stuff. And we also, what I want to go ahead and focus on is getting messages sent as well, which I didn't have time for this episode. But that's enough yapping for me. If you guys did enjoy, please do a like, comment, and subscribe. Everything helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you guys do want to see where we start from absolute scratch to get to the point we are now, I've been linking the playlist in the outro section. That way you guys can go ahead and check that out. So as always, guys, it's been Ethan Uncoder. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.